Some bargains are made with ink, some with blood, and some with a kind of hunger that makes a person ashamed to name it. Out on the frontier, love did not always arrive wearing Sunday clothes or speaking sweetly at the door. Sometimes it came limping behind a milk cow, smelling of dust and fear, with a woman's whole future tied to a rope in a stranger's hand. Folks remember the weddings with flowers and fiddle music, but the ones that change lives often begin with silence, debt, and a promise nobody truly understands. Coraline Mercer stood in the hard yellow light outside the livery stable in Copper Bend, Arizona Territory, with her wedding dress gathered in both fists so it would not drag through the manure. The dress had once been ivory, might be even fine, but 3 days of travel had wrinkled it, and the hem was striped with depot dust. Beside her, a red milk cow swung her blunt head and chewed as if nothing in the world were humiliating. Matthew Granger held the cow's lead rope, not her hand. The justice of the peace had barely finished saying the words, and the 2 witnesses, one sleepy blacksmith and one store clerk, who smelled of licorice, had already gone back to their errands. Coraline's new husband stood with his hat brim low, his jaw set like a gate latch, and his eyes fixed on the cow, as though she were the part of the bargain most likely to run. Old Mrs. Peabody, who ran the boarding house and carried gossip like a lantern, stood on the boardwalk with her arms folded. "Well," she said loudly enough for the whole street to hear, "I have seen men marry for land, for gold, for water rights, and once for spite. But for a cow, that is a new kind of low." A few men near the freight office laughed. One of them tried to hide it behind a cough. Another did not bother. Coraline kept her chin lifted, though the inside of her mouth had gone dry. The cow's brass bell made a soft, foolish clank against its neck. That sound would stay with her for years. The bell, the laughter, the scrape of Matthew's boot as he shifted his weight, but said nothing. She had traveled from St. Louis with 1 trunk, 1 Bible, 2 letters of introduction, and the belief that marriage, even a practical one, might offer a place to stand. Her father's death had left debts. Her mother's passing had left silence. Her brother had taken the last of the household money and vanished east instead of west. The man she was meant to marry in Prescott had died of lung fever before her train crossed the territorial line. By the time Coraline reached Copper Bend, she had no fare back and no respectable place to stay. She did have one thing, a milk cow named Mercy. Mercy had belonged to a widow who died along the Gila Road. Coraline had helped bury the woman under a mesquite tree, and the freight driver, not wanting the trouble of the animal, had said Coraline could have the cow if she could keep hold of the rope. Mercy gave milk steady and rich, and in a dry town with hungry children and hard biscuits, that made the animal worth more than Coraline's trunk, dress, and future put together. Matthew Granger needed a milk cow. That was what everyone in Copper Bend knew. His little ranch, 9 miles north, where the wash cut through Redstone, had no woman in the house, 3 orphaned nieces under his care, and 1 weak calf refusing to thrive. His last cow had died from snakebite. The banker had tightened a note around his land. The girls had been drinking thin coffee and goat water for 2 weeks. Matthew had come to town hoping to buy milk on credit, and left married to a woman he had hardly looked at, because the preacher's wife told him Coraline Mercer needed protection before sundown, and Coraline told him plainly that Mercy was part of any bargain made. If this story finds you where the night is quiet, tell us where you are listening from. Like, share, and subscribe if Coraline and Matthew's road touches something tender in you. Now come back with me to Copper Bend, where pride was dusty, hunger was real, and love had not yet learned its own name. Matthew tugged the rope once. "Wagons this way." Coraline turned toward him. "As thou, you mean to say?" He paused, his shoulders stiff beneath a faded brown coat. There was a tear at one cuff that someone had mended with black thread. Not a wife's stitch, Coraline thought, A man's hurried work by poor lamplight. He looked at her then, truly looked, and she saw that his eyes were not cold. Tired, yes. Guarded, yes. But not cruel. One was hazel with a ring of green near the center, the other shadowed by an old scar at the temple that pulsed slightly when he narrowed it against the sun. "I'm not a man with fine words," he said. "I did not ask for fine ones." The cowbell clanked again. Mercy stepped on the edge of Coraline's dress. Matthew looked down. His mouth moved as if an apology were trying to come, and did not know the road. He bent instead, took the muddied hem gently between two fingers, and freed it from beneath the cow's hoof. The street had gone quieter. That small act, wordless and careful, unsettled Coraline more than kindness might have. She did not hang him. He did not ask her to. At the wagon, 3 girls sat in the back among sacks of flour, a broken chair, and a crate of nails. The oldest looked about 11, all elbows and suspicion, with brown hair cut uneven under her bonnet. The middle child had round cheeks and solemn eyes. The youngest, no more than 5, held a rag doll with one button eye, and watched Coraline the way a hungry bird watches a hen. Matthew cleared his throat. "This is Ruth, Annie, and little Pearl. Girls, this is Mrs. Granger, Mrs. Granger, Mrs. Granger." The name landed on Coraline like a shawl put around the wrong shoulders. Ruth's face closed. "You traded Mercy for her?" "No," Matthew said sharply, then softer. "No, Mercy comes with her." Annie touched the cow's flank. "Does she give milk?" "Yeah," Caroline said. Her voice was steadier with children than with grown people. "If she is fed, watered, and spoken to respectfully." Pearl leaned forward. "Can cows understand disrespect?" "Most women can," Coraline answered. Matthew's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time that day, something like a rueful crease touched a corner of his mouth. It vanished before it became a smile. They rode out of Copper Bend in a heat that shimmered over the road. The wagon wheels cracked over stones. Coraline sat on the front bench beside Matthew with her gloved hands folded over the Bible in her lap. Behind them the girls whispered, and Mercy followed on a loose rope tied to the tailboard, her bell marking each mile with a patient clunk. Copper Bend fell away. The false front shops, the whitewashed church, the water trough, the eyes watching from shaded doorways. Ahead lay mesquite, greasewood, and open land that seemed to have been scraped raw by the hand of God. The mountains sat purple in the distance, beautiful and indifferent. Matthew drove with both hands on the reins. His left thumb bore a scar across the knuckle. His hat had sweat stains around the crown. He smelled faintly of leather, dust, and wood smoke. Coraline waited for him to explain the rules of her new life. He did not. At last she said, "Where will I sleep?" His hands tightened. "There's a small room off the kitchen. Belonged to my sister, your niece's mother." "Yes." "Is their father dead too?" The wagon rolled over a rut. Pearl's doll fell, and Annie picked it up. Matthew kept his eyes ahead. "My brother died first. Fever. My sister brought the girls to me after. She lasted 6 months. I am sorry." He nodded once, but the words struck somewhere deeper than the nod showed. Coraline saw it in the way his jaw worked, as if grief were a hard piece of jerky he had been chewing for a year. "And you?" he asked. "My parents are gone. My brother might as well be, might as well. He left. That is all." Matthew did not press. For that she was grateful. The ranch came into view near sundown, low and plain against the red wash. A weathered house leaned a little east, as if tired of resisting the wind. There was a barn with missing boards, a chicken yard with half the fence sagging, a corral, a dry garden patch, and a porch that had lost 2 planks. A cottonwood stood beside the well, its leaves rattling like paper prayers. No flowers, no curtains in the windows, no woman's hand anywhere, except in the ghosts of things that had once been tended and then abandoned by sorrow. The girls jumped down before Matthew set the brake. Ruth grabbed a bucket, and he chased 3 hens from the doorway. Pearl dragged her doll by one arm and stood beside Coraline's trunk, as if guarding it. Matthew helped Coraline down. His hand was warm through her glove, calloused, impersonal. He released her at once. "I'll get Mercy settled," he said. "Ruth can show you inside." Ruth's mouth tightened. "I can start supper. You can show her inside." The girl obeyed, but her steps were angry. The kitchen smelled of old ashes, sour milk, and beans. A black stove squatted against the wall. Dishes sat in a basin with a film of grease on top. A flour sack had been left open, and weevils moved in it like small secrets. On the table lay a cracked blue cup, a dull knife, 3 school slates, and a woman's hair comb with 2 missing teeth. Ruth saw Coraline looking at the comb and snatched it up. "That was mess. I did not touch it." "You looked." Coraline removed her gloves slowly. "Looking is not stealing." Ruth's cheeks flushed. "You are not our ma." "No, do I know," Coraline said. "I am not." The simple agreement seemed to confuse the girl. Annie came in carrying a stick of wood too large for her arms. Pearl followed with 3 eggs in her apron, one already cracked. Coraline looked at the stove, the children, the dirty basin, and the room off the kitchen with its half-open door. She had imagined a husband, perhaps old, perhaps lonely, perhaps kind if fortune felt generous. She had not imagined this. 3 grieving girls, a man ashamed of needing her cow, and a house where sadness had been allowed to harden on every surface. Matthew entered with the milk pail 10 minutes later. "Mercy's tied in the barn." She took feet. Coraline held out her hand. "Pale?" He blinked. "I can milk." "Can you strain, cool, and save cream without souring it?" His silence answered. "Pale," she said again. He handed it over. That first supper was not graceful. Coraline threw out the weevil flour, which made Ruth mutter that flour cost money. She washed the pan while beans scorched, because Annie forgot to stir them. Pearl cried when told the cracked egg could not be put back in its shell. Matthew split wood outside with more force than the logs required. In the end, they ate beans, fried cornmeal made from the last clean handful in the sack, and warm milk. Coraline took the smallest portion. Ruth noticed, "You don't like our food?" "I like eating after children have eaten enough." Ruth looked away. Matthew lifted his cup of milk, but did not drink. He stared at it as if it embarrassed him. Then he set it beside Pearl's plate. Pearl pushed it back. "Uncle Matthew, you need some." "I had mine." "No, you didn't." The room held still. Coraline watched him lie gently to a child who knew hunger too well to believe it. She poured half her milk into his cup. He frowned. "Mrs. Granger, do not waste it by arguing." Ruth stared at the table. Annie hid a tiny smile behind her spoon. Pearl drank with both hands around the cup. That night, Coraline stood in the small room that had belonged to Matthew's sister. Her trunk sat at the foot of a narrow bed. The quilt was faded, clean in some places and stained in others. On the wall hung a tintype of a woman with Matthew's eyes and a baby in her lap docked. A cracked pitcher stood on a washstand. Beneath the bed, Coraline found a child's shoe, stiff with age. She set it on the washstand beside the pitcher. Matthew knocked once on the doorframe. She turned. He stood outside, not crossing the threshold. In one hand he held a folded blanket. "Nights get cold," he said. "Thank you." He placed it on the chair, still without stepping in. "I'll sleep in the shed for a while," he said. "Until we settle what this is." Coraline folded her arms. "And what is this?" His eyes went to the ring on her finger, plain brass from the mercantile, because there had not been time or money for gold. "A legal marriage." "That is not an answer." "No," he said. "I reckon it isn't." He looked so tired then that some of her anger thinned, though not enough to leave her defenseless. "I did not marry you to claim anything from you," he said. I needed mercy. You needed a name that would keep men from talking and women from turning you out. That's the bargain as I understand it. And what am I in this bargain? A fence around your cow? The word struck. He lowered his gaze. No, he said quietly. You're a woman who deserved better than being laughed at in the street. The room changed around that sentence. Not softened, exactly, but shifted. Coraline's fingers tightened around her own elbows. And you? What did you deserve? Matthew looked toward the dark kitchen where the girls were whispering in their bed by the stove. Less than I've been given, he said. Then he turned and left. For the first week, they moved around each other like people, carrying full buckets on a narrow path. Matthew rose before dawn and left coffee on the stove. Always too strong, always bitter. Coraline learned to pour a little water into the pot and set a cup aside where it would stay warm. She milked Mercy, strained the milk through clean cloth from an old petticoat, skimmed cream, and taught Annie to wash the pail with boiling water instead of creek sand. Ruth resisted everything. She hated Coraline's way of folding clothes. She hated that Coraline opened windows in the morning. She hated that the cracked blue cup, which had been her mother's favorite, was moved to a safer shelf. Once, when Coraline mended Matthew's shirt, Ruth took the needle and unpicked 6 stitches while staring straight at her. Coraline did not shout. She held out her hand. Give me the needle. Ruth's eyes filled, angry with their own wetness. He forgot her already. Coraline sat back. The shirt lay between them, brown cotton torn at the shoulder. No, she said. Men like Matthew Granger do not forget. They just run out of clean shirts. Ruth blinked hard. I am mending cloth, Coraline said, not replacing a mother. Ruth dropped the needle into her palm and fled outside. That evening, Matthew found the shirt folded on his bedroll in the shed. He came to the kitchen door with it in hand. You mended this? Yes. He touched the seam. My sister used blue thread on brown too. It was what you had. Ruth give you trouble. Ruth has trouble. That is different. Matthew stood with his hat in both hands. The lamp lit one side of his face and left the scarred temple in shadow. She was 9 when she saw her mother die, he said. I told her to fetch water, thought it would keep her busy. She came back, and Ellen was gone. There was the name at last, Ellen. Coraline wiped flour from her fingers onto her apron. Children make guilt out of anything they are handed. So do men. The sentence was so low she almost missed it. He put the shirt over his arm. I'll fix the porch tomorrow. You nearly caught your foot. I did catch it. His head lifted. I did not fall, she added. I'll fix it. The next day he replaced 2 porch planks before breakfast, though the calf needed watching and the north fence had lost another rail. Coraline said nothing, but when he came in at noon, there was coffee waiting, not burned, and a plate with the better half of a biscuit. He looked from the plate to her. Girls ate? Yes. You eat? Yes. He sat, but not till she turned away, as if accepting the better biscuit required privacy. By the second week, Coraline had made curtains from a flour sack and the least torn portion of an old sheet. The kitchen no longer smells sour. Mercy's milk put flesh back into Pearl's cheeks. Annie learned to gather eggs without crushing them. Ruth still scowled, but she stopped undoing mending. The ranch did not become happy. Happiness was not a lamp one lit at will, but order returned in small, practical ways. A broom by the door, clean water covered with cloth, beans sorted before cooking, a Bible dusted and set on the shelf, though Coraline did not open it where anyone could see. Matthew noticed things without praising them. He brought a sack of cornmeal from town and set it on the table with 2 peppermint sticks wrapped in paper, one for each younger girl, and one placed near Ruth's slate without comment. He also brought Coraline a spool of white thread. She held it in her palm. Did I ask for thread? No, then why? He shifted. Saw you were near out. The spool was worth maybe 6 cents. It felt heavier than jewelry. The town did not forgive them so easily. Copperbend liked a story, and Matthew and Coraline had given it one fat enough to feed on for months. When Coraline drove in with him to sell butter and buy sugar, women turned their heads. Men looked at Mercy's calf, now stronger, and made jokes just soft enough to deny. At Whitcomb's Mercantile, Mr. Silas Whitcomb himself leaned both elbows on the counter. His mustache was waxed to points, and his eyes measured everything by what it could fetch. "Well, Mrs. Granger," he said, drawing out the name, "how does it feel to be the only bride in Arizona territory with a bell around her dowry's neck?" A woman near the ribbon shelf snickered. Coraline set 6 wrapped pats of butter on the counter. Each was pressed with a small leaf pattern she had carved into a wooden paddle. "It feels profitable, Mr. Whitcomb." His smile thinned. "Butter's common, not clean butter. Not sweet butter. Not butter that keeps 2 days in this heat because the crock was scalded and cooled proper." Matthew stood behind her, silent as a fence post. She wondered if he would defend her. She wondered why she wanted him to. Whitcomb poked one pat with the end of his pencil. 4 cents each, 7.5 found. Then I will take them to Mrs. Alvarez at the hotel. Whitcomb's gaze sharpened. The hotel fed stage passengers and paid cash when it had to. 6, he said. 7, Caroline replied. And you might tell your customers it came from the cow valuable enough to make a decent man marry. The woman at the ribbons stopped smiling. Matthew made a small sound behind her, almost a cough. Whitcomb's face darkened, but he counted out the coins. Outside, Coraline tucked the money into her reticule. "You needn't stand so quiet next time." Matthew tied the sugar sack in the wagon. "You were doing fine. That is not the same as being defended." He looked at her then, slow and sober. "No, it isn't." They rode home with the sun behind them, the wagon smelling of sugar, leather, and the faint sweetness of butter. Halfway to the ranch, Matthew said, "I should have spoken." Coraline watched the road. "Yes, I'm used to keeping my mouth shut. Words in town usually cost more than they pay. They cost me today." His hands flexed on the reins. "I know. That was all. No speech, no promise." Yet the following Sunday, when they went to church because Ruth asked and Pearl wanted to wear a ribbon, Matthew proved he had heard. The church was whitewashed, but dusty, with a bell that cracked on the high note. Coraline sat with the girls in the third pew. Matthew sat at the aisle, hat on his knee. Mrs. Peabody whispered behind her fan. Coraline caught only pieces. "Cow bride, Mercy Granger, paid in milk." Ruth stiffened beside her. Annie stared at her shoes. Pearl leaned against Coraline's arm, warm and small. When the service ended and people spilled into the yard, Mrs. Peabody smiled wide as a knife. "Mrs. Granger, I do hope married life suits you, though I suppose a woman must not be particular when livestock is involved." Matthew turned. The yard quieted in that hungry way crows have when they scent trouble. "My wife's name is Coraline," he said. Mrs. Peabody blinked. Matthew stepped closer, not threatening but immovable. "You'll use it, Mr. Granger. I meant no." "Yes, ma'am, you did." His voice stayed low. That made it worse. "And I let talk pass once because I was ashamed of how this marriage began. That was my failing, not hers." Caroline's throat tightened. Matthew looked around the churchyard, at Whitcomb, at the banker in his gray vest, at women with gloved hands and men pretending not to listen. "I married Caroline Mercer before God and law. Anyone who has a quarrel with me, bring it to my face. Anyone who shames her behind a fan is a coward." No one spoke. Pearl slid her hand into Coraline's. Ruth stared at Matthew as if seeing a door open in a wall she had believed solid. On the wagon ride home, Matthew seemed embarrassed by his own words. He drove stiffly and said nothing. At last Coraline said, "Thank you." He nodded. "That was more than fine words," she added. His mouth twitched. "Don't know what came over me. Decency, perhaps." He glanced at her. "Hope it passes." It felt expensive. She laughed before she meant to. The sound startled all of them. Annie giggled. Pearl began laughing too, though she did not know why. Ruth tried not to smile and failed. Matthew looked ahead, but his shoulders eased. That evening, he moved his bedroll from the shed to the main room by the cold hearth. He did not ask. Coraline did not object. The kitchen room remained hers. The legal marriage remained boundaried by closed doors and careful speech. Yet, something had altered. He was no longer outside the house like an animal put away for the night. He was inside, where the stove ticked as it cooled and children breathed in their sleep. Summer thickened. The wash ran dry. Dust settled into every seam of clothing. Matthew worked until his shirt clung dark to his back. Coraline churned butter, tended Mercy, planted beans in the old garden patch, though Ruth said nothing would grow, and walked the fence line with a hammer in her apron pocket because goats from the neighboring claim slipped through and ate anything green. One afternoon she found Matthew in the barn, shirt sleeve rolled, blood running from his forearm. A jagged nail stuck out from a broken stall board. "Sit," she said. "It's nothing. It is bleeding on your boot." He looked down as if surprised by evidence. She fetched boiled water, clean cloth, and the brown bottle of carbolic she had found behind flour tins. He sat on a milking stool, while sunlight came through the barn boards in bright stripes. Mercy shifted nearby, chewing. The calf bumped its nose against Matthew's shoulder. Coraline cleaned the wound. He did not flinch, but his fingers tightened around his hat brim. "You have done this before," he said. "My mother took in washing, mending, and the occasional man too proud to visit a doctor. And your father, a schoolteacher, gentle when sober, quieter when not." Matthew looked at her, but she kept her eyes on the bandage. "He owed money," she said. "After he died, men came to the house and touched things that had never belonged to them. Books, my mother's clock, a quilt my grandmother made. They put prices on everything, even grief." She tied the cloth. "And your brother?" Matthew asked. Coraline pulled the knot firm enough to make him inhale. "My brother put a price on me." The barn fell still except for the cow. Matthew's voice lowered. "What does that mean?" She stood and gathered the basin. "It means I came west because a man in St. Louis believed my brother had promised him my hand as settlement on a debt. I chose a marriage letter instead. That is all. It isn't all. It is all I will say today." She turned to leave, but his uninjured hand closed lightly around her wrist. Not hard, just enough to stop the loss. Coraline, she looked at his hand first. He released her at once. "I'm not him," Matthew said. The words were plain, insufficient, everything. Her eyes burned, and she hated it. "Do not make promises you cannot understand." I understand debt. That is not the same." "No," he said, "but I understand being priced lower than an animal." She looked at him then. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. The bandage she had tied was already spotted red. "My father had a ranch outside Tucson," he said. "Not much but his. He drank it down acre by acre. When I was 17, he traded my best horse to cover a car debt. Horse I raised from a foal. I said I'd leave if he did. He told me a horse had sense enough to be worth feeding." Coraline's anger loosened. "What happened? I left, took work where I could, never went back. Heard he died 2 years later. Heard strangers bought the place. And the horse?" Matthew's face closed, but not before pain crossed it. "Don't know." The smallness of the answer made it worse. Coraline set the basin down. "What was its name?" "Blue." She nodded, as if he handed her something fragile. "Mercy is not blue, no. And I am not Mercy." His eyes met hers. "No." For a moment, the barn held more than heat and dust. It held two people seeing the shape of old wounds in each other without touching them. Then Pearl burst in crying, because Annie had told her scorpions crawled into ears at night, and the moment folded itself away. By late July, the bean vines climbed. Mercy's calf lived. The butter money bought cloth for school dresses. Coraline cut Ruth's hair evenly while the girl sat rigid on a stool. Ma used to pull too hard, Ruth said. I can stop. I didn't say stop. Coraline combed gently. After a while, Ruth asked, Did you love somebody before? Coraline's hand paused. No, did Uncle Matthew? I do not know. He loved Aunt Ellen. Not like a husband, like family, but after she died, he stopped coming inside before dark. He used to sing Pearl to sleep. Badly, Coraline smiled. I can imagine. He doesn't sing now. No, Ruth's face in the little mirror looked older than 11. Are you going to leave? Coraline set down the scissors. Outside, Matthew's hammer rang against fence wire. I do not know. Ruth swallowed. That means yes. It means I try not to lie to children. The girl looked down at her hands. If you leave, Mercy goes. Coraline could have been hurt by that. Perhaps she was. But children ask first about what hunger taught them to fear. Yes, she said. Mercy is mine. Ruth nodded, tears dropping soundlessly onto her apron. Coraline rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. Ruth did not pull away. I am here today, Coraline said. The girl whispered, That is not enough. No, Coraline said, but it is true. The truth of leaving became sharper in August when a letter arrived from Prescott. The envelope was creased, forwarded twice, and stained at one corner. Matthew brought it from town with supplies and laid it beside Coraline's plate after supper. Came for you. She knew the handwriting. Not the words yet, but the slant of selfishness in the letters. Her brother Julian. She carried it to her room and shut the door. Inside, the air felt close. She opened the letter with her sewing scissors. Cora, I have located you at last. Your situation is irregular and dangerous to the family name. Mr. Voss remains willing to forgive a portion of my debt if you return and complete the arrangement properly. I have told him you were misled by frontier people. He is not a patient man. Do not force me to come fetch you. Your brother, Julian Mercer. There was a postscript. If you have any money or valuables, keep them ready. Travel is costly. Coraline sat on the bed until the lamp burned low. The little shoes she had found on her first night still stood on the washstand. She had never asked whose it was. Some griefs in a house should be approached like sleeping dogs. A knock came. Coraline, Matthew's voice. She folded the letter. Eyes. Pearl's asking for you. That undid her more than the threat. She opened the door. Matthew stood with Pearl half asleep in his arms, hair tangled, cheeks flushed. She dreamed the cowbell was a church bell, and you were gone, he said awkwardly. Pearl reached for her. Coraline took the child, felt the warm weight settle against her shoulder, and closed her eyes. Matthew saw the letter in her hand. Bad news? Old news in a new envelope. Your brother, she nodded. His face hardened. Is he coming? He says he might. Then let him. It is not so simple. Matthew's gaze dropped to Pearl, then back to Coraline. No, I reckon nothing is. She wanted him to say he would stop Julian. She wanted him not to, because being protected could become another kind of debt. She carried Pearl to the girl's bed and tucked her in. Ruth pretended to sleep. Annie did not bother pretending. Back in the kitchen, Matthew had not moved. I can handle my brother, Coraline said. I believe you. Do you? Yeah. Nice. He picked up his hat from the table. I also believe a rattlesnake can kill a strong woman if it strikes from under a board. Julian is not brave enough to be a rattlesnake. What is Voss? The name in his mouth made her go cold. She had not said it aloud. Matthew saw the change and cursed softly, not at her, but at the world. You don't have to tell me. He owns a stable in St. Louis, she said, and men, and debts, and perhaps my brother. He touched you. No, she wrapped her arms around herself, but he looked at me as if he already had. Matthew stepped toward her, then stopped. That stopping mattered. It showed he knew anger did not give him rights. "I'll sleep by the door tonight," he said. "You already sleep by the hearth?" "Tonight I'll load the rifle." Her laugh came out thin. "This is a legal marriage, Mr. Granger. You need not make it a fortress." His eyes held hers. "Maybe I need a fortress too." The silence after that was not empty. It was full of things neither one could say. The next morning, Caroline rose before dawn and packed her trunk. Not all of it, not loudly, only the things that mattered. The Bible, her mother's thimble, 2 dresses, the letter, a little money from butter sales. She told herself she was not leaving yet. She was preparing. A woman who prepared was not running. Ruth found her. The girl stood in the doorway in her nightdress, hair wild. "You lied." Caroline closed the trunk. "Nah, you said you were here today." "I am. But you're fixing to not be." The accusation woke Pearl, then Annie. Within moments, all 3 girls stood in the room, each wearing a different kind of fear. Caroline knelt. "Listen to me. My brother might bring trouble. I will not let that trouble fall on this house." Ruth's mouth trembled. "Trouble already lives here. It eats breakfast with us." Caroline could not answer. Matthew appeared behind the girls, hair damp from the well, suspenders loose over his shirt. He looked at the trunk, then at her. "Girls," he said, "go feed the hens." Ruth shook her head. "No, Ruth, no. Everybody leaves when grown folks say, 'Go feed something.'" Matthew flinched, as if struck. Caroline stood. "This is between your uncle and me." Ruth's eyes blazed. "Everything is between grown folks until children pay for it." Then she ran out. Annie followed, crying silently. Pearl lingered just long enough to whisper, "Please don't sell Mercy." And then she too was gone. Matthew stepped into the room but left the door open. "You were going to leave without telling me." "I had not decided." "That trunk looks decided." She gripped the bedpost. "I will not be the reason you lose what little you have." "What little I have?" His voice roughened. "You mean the ranch, the note, the cracked stove?" The girls, her eyes filled. "Especially them." He took off his hat though he was not wearing one. His hand went to his head, found nothing, dropped. "You think leaving pracks them?" "It removes the cause?" "No," he said. "It teaches them love is something that packs before dawn." The word love passed between them like a spark falling in dry grass. Both saw it, neither touched it. Caroline whispered, "Do not use that word carelessly." I didn't. Her breath caught. Matthew looked almost frightened by what he had admitted, but he did not take it back. "I married you for a cow," he said. "That is how folks tell it, my bay. That is how it started in my own sorry mind." Mercy meant milk. Milk meant the girls eating. "You meant—" He stopped, ashamed. "I don't know what I let you mean." "Safety, my bay, a name on paper. Work I didn't know how to ask for." She stood very still. "But you are not a bargain to me now," he said. "You're the woman who made Pearl laugh with cream on her lip. You're the woman who told Ruth grief was not disloyal. You're the woman who keeps coffee warm though you pretend it's no trouble. You're the woman who looks at a broken fence and fixes it before a man finishes complaining." His voice dropped. "Stay." One word, not grand, not enough to solve anything, enough to stop her hand from reaching for the trunk. Caroline looked at the window. Dawn was just beginning. Outside, Mercy's bell sounded once from the barn. "I am afraid," she said. Matthew nodded. "So am I." That was the line that kept her. Not courage, not certainty. Fear shared honestly over a packed trunk in a dead woman's room. She unpacked before breakfast. Ruth watched from the yard and pretended not to. 2 days later, Julian Mercer came to Copper Bend in a black hired buggy with a man named Voss beside him. Everyone saw them arrive. Copper Bend had an appetite for strangers, especially dangerous ones. Julian wore a city suit too fine for the dust, and carried a cane he did not need. He had Caroline's dark hair and none of her steadiness. Mr. Voss was thick through the neck, with pale eyes and a gold watch chain stretched across his waistcoat like a warning. They went first to Whitcomb's Mercantile. By noon, half the town knew Caroline Mercer. Granger had a brother claiming her marriage was fraudulent, coerced, and possibly entered for livestock consideration, which made the story even tastier than before. Sheriff Abel Cross rode to Matthew's ranch near sundown. Matthew met him at the gate. Caroline stood on the porch with Ruth behind her, Annie holding Pearl's hand. The sheriff was an older man with a gray mustache and kind eyes made tired by too many fools. He removed his hat to Caroline. "Mrs. Granger, Sheriff, your brother is in town, so I hear. He says you were promised elsewhere." "I was promised by him, not by me." The sheriff nodded slightly. "That is how I figured." Matthew's hand rested near the rifle by the door, but not on it. Sheriff Cross continued, "Voss is pushing the banker. Says if your marriage stands, he'll call in debts tied through your brother and make trouble. Says Mr. Granger knowingly interfered with a contract." Matthew gave a humorless laugh. "I didn't know enough to interfere with anything. Banker don't care what you knew, if money's in it," the sheriff said. "Your note is held by Pritchard Bank." Pritchard had dinner with Voss at the hotel. Caroline felt the porch boards under her feet. The ranch, already fragile, had become a thing men could discuss over gravy. Matthew looked at her. "Go inside." "No." The sheriff's mustache twitched as if he approved. Caroline stepped down from the porch. "Can my brother force me to leave?" "No, Mom," Sheriff Cross said. "Not while I wear this badge and you say you're here by choice." "And can the banker take the ranch?" Matthew answered before the sheriff could. "If he calls the note and I can't pay, yes." "How much?" "Caroline, how much?" He looked toward the barn, jaw tight. $140 by end of month, plus interest. The number struck like heat. Butter money was coins. Eggs were coins. Milk was coins. $140 might as well have been a mountain. Voss and Julian came the next morning. They did not ride to the house at first. They stopped near the road, looking over the fence line, the barn, the cow, the house. Voss pointed once with his cane. Julian laughed. Matthew stood by the gate. Caroline joined him. He gave her one quick look, but he did not tell her to go inside. Voss stepped down from the buggy. "Matthew Granger." Matthew nodded. "I am Edmund Voss. You have something that does not belong to you." Matthew's voice was calm. "That's so, my intended wife." Caroline's stomach turned, but she stepped forward. "I was never your intended wife." Voss smiled without warmth. "Miss Mercer, your brother entered an agreement on behalf of the family. My brother could not sell what he did not own." Julian climbed down, dusting his sleeve. "Cora, don't be dramatic. You have made your point. You were embarrassed. You ran. You married some cowhand in a panic. We can have it annulled. Do not call me Cora." He blinked. Matthew's eyes shifted to her, and despite everything, she saw satisfaction there. Julian tried a softer tone. "You don't belong here. Look at this place. You are living like a servant." Ruth appeared on the porch. "She ain't a servant, Ruth," Matthew warned gently. But the girl came down one step. "She's Mrs. Granger." Voss's pale eyes moved over the children, the yard, Mercy, in the corral. "Charming. The little milk kingdom." Matthew's restraint showed in his hands. They remained open at his sides. Voss turned to him. "You married this woman for a cow. I have witnessed statements from town. That makes your claim to honor rather thin." Matthew said nothing. Caroline turned sharply. "He married me because I asked him to." Matthew looked at her. She continued, voice clear though her palms were damp. "I stood alone in a town that had no place for me. I had no money, no family worth naming, and no safe roof." Matthew Granger offered me his name without touching my dignity. If Mercy came with me, that was because she was mine, and I would not enter any home stripped of the last living thing entrusted to my care. Voss's smile faded. Julian's face reddened. You sound ridiculous. No, she said. I sound free. A silence passed. Then Voss leaned slightly toward Matthew. Pritchard will call your note. When he does, I might buy this place for less than the barn timber. I might even keep the cow. Matthew moved then. Only one step, but that step put his body between Voss and Coraline. You won't speak of what's hers, as if it can be taken. Voss looked amused again. Everything can be taken, Mr. Granger. Ask your wife. Ask your father's horse. Matthew went still. Coraline felt it happen. The old wound struck clean. Julian smiled, pleased with himself. Russ, Cora told me how sentimental frontier men can be. Blue, wasn't it? Matthew's face drained of expression. Coraline's heart lurched. She had not told Julian. She had written the name once in a letter never sent, then burned. How had Voss known? Then she saw it. Ruth near the porch, face pale. The girl had heard the barn conversation and repeated it in town, perhaps to defend him, perhaps not knowing the danger of tender things carried into public. Matthew's eyes flicked toward Ruth. The child looked ready to collapse. Voss chuckled. A man who still mourns a horse should not play husband. Matthew's fist closed. Coraline touched his sleeve, not pulling, just reminding him he was not alone in his own body. He breathed once, twice. Then he said, Leave my land? Voss tipped his hat. For now. Julian lingered. His eyes pleaded beneath his arrogance. Cora, you don't understand what he'll do to me. Coraline looked at her brother and saw the boy who once brought her stolen apples, the young man who sold their mother's clock, the coward who thought love meant someone else standing where the blow would fall. I understand, she said. I am simply done being the one he does it to. The buggy rolled away in a cloud of dust. Ruth ran to the barn. Matthew stood a long moment, then walked after her. Coraline followed at a distance. She found them in the dimness beside Mercy's stall. Ruth was sobbing into her apron. Matthew crouched before her, awkward and broad-shouldered, not touching because he seemed unsure whether forgiveness had hands. I didn't know, Ruth choked. Mrs. Peabody asked, why you never had horses with names, and I said you did once, and then, I know, I told your secret. It wasn't a secret, he said. Yes, it was. Matthew looked at the dirt floor. My bay. But it was mine to keep or lose, not yours to carry forever. Ruth sobbed harder. You're mad? I am. She flinched. He added, and I love you. The girl looked up, stunned. Both can be true, he said. Coraline turned away before they saw her crying. The note came due in 12 days. Those 12 days became a season of their own. Matthew rode to neighboring ranches, offering labor in advance. Most had already heard the story and did not want Voss's displeasure. Sheriff Cross asked around quietly. Mrs. Alvarez at the hotel bought every pat of butter Coraline could make and paid a cent extra without mentioning charity. The girls gathered eggs, hauled water, and stopped complaining about beans. Coraline opened her trunk and unfolded the blue wool shawl that had belonged to her mother. It was the finest thing she owned. She also took out the Bible with a silver clasp, though the silver was thin and the thimble real sterling, worn smooth by years of work. She wrapped them in cloth. Matthew saw. No, you do not know what I intend. Yes, I do. The shawl will fetch something. The Bible too. No, she turned on him. Do not make pride a roof over children. His face tightened. Do not sell your mother to save my land, our land, she said. The words came before thought. They stood between them, astonishing. Matthew's eyes changed. Coraline looked down at the shawl. If I am staying, Then I do not stay as a guest beside your troubles. He came closer, stopped at the other side of the table. I can't let you lose everything. I have already lost nearly everything once. The difference now is I choose where it goes. He rested both hands on the table, head bowed, head bowed. Coraline. She waited. He looked up. I don't want your things. I want you at this table when the trouble is done. The room blurred. She folded the shawl back into the trunk, not because the money was not needed, but because he had finally named what mattered without making it a claim. That night, they sat on the porch after the girls slept. Heat lightning flickered far off behind the mountains. Mercy's bell sounded from the corral. A coyote called and another answered. Matthew held a tin cup of coffee. Coraline held mending but had not made a stitch in 10 minutes. I found Ellen's shoe under the bed, she said. I know. I set it on the washstand. I saw. Was it Pearl's? His eyes stayed on the dark yard. No. Ellen had a baby boy before Pearl. Lived 2 days. She kept the shoe because he'd made the pair before he came. Said one shoe was enough to prove her been expected. Coraline's needle lowered. After she died, Matthew said, I couldn't touch anything in that room. Couldn't move the shoe. Couldn't wash the curtains. Couldn't mend what she left torn. I thought leaving it all was honoring her. Grief can make a shrine out of dust. He looked at her. You always have a way of saying a thing that makes me wish I'd known it sooner. I learned most things too late. Maybe not this. The night pressed close and warm. Coraline felt the boards beneath her, the mending in her lap, the man beside her who had married her for a cow, and now sat as if her silence were worth keeping company with. Matthew spoke again. If we lose the ranch, I'll find work. And the girls, with us, if you'll have that. With us, she repeated. He nodded slowly. I should ask proper. Not because of paper, because of you. Her heart beat so hard she heard it. He set the cup down. When this began, I gave you my name like a tool, useful, plain, something to get through a day. I didn't know a name could become a home when the right person said it. Coraline's fingers tightened around the cloth. I won't ask you for more than you choose, he said. But if there comes a day you can look at me and not see the bargain, I'd be grateful to be your husband in truth. She could not speak for a long moment. Then she said, You already are, in more ways than you know. His eyes closed briefly. She reached across the small space between their chairs and placed her hand over his. His skin was rough and warm. He did not move. Then, carefully, as if approaching a skittish horse, he turned his palm upward beneath hers. They sat that way until the coffee went cold. The climax came on a Friday, under a sky the color of hammered tin. Banker Pritchard called the note at 10 in the morning. By 11, Voss had made an offer on the ranch. By noon, half the town had gathered near the bank, pretending business. Matthew arrived in his work clothes, clean but worn, with Coraline beside him in a brown dress and her mother's blue shawl around her shoulders. Ruth, Annie, and Pearl rode in the wagon, silent and pale. Sheriff Cross stood near the hitching post. Mrs. Alvarez stood outside the hotel with her arms crossed. Even Mrs. Peabody watched from beneath a parasol, her mouth pinched. Inside the bank, the air smelled of ink and varnish. Pritchard sat behind his desk, fingers steepled. Voss stood near the window. Julian slouched in a chair, looking ill. The full amount is due, Pritchard said. $147.80. Matthew placed a small canvas pouch on the desk. Coins spilled out. $32. Pritchard did not touch it. Coraline added her butter money, wrapped in cloth. $11.40. Voss smiled. Matthew's face burned, but he did not look away. He can pay the rest after roundup. You know the cattle are sound. Pritchard sighed. Mr. Granger, banking cannot run on sentiment. Voss turned his gold watch. I will pay the note in full today. In return, the land transfers at once, and I will consider Mrs. Granger's position separately. Matthew's hands curled. Coraline stepped forward. My position is beside my husband. Voss's eyes narrowed. Your husband cannot keep a roof over you. No, Coraline said. But he never tried to buy me from my brother. Julian flinched. The room chilled. Pritchard cleared his throat. Personal accusations do not alter debt. No, Coraline said. Records do. She opened her reticule and removed a folded paper. Matthew looked at it, confused. She had not told him, not because she mistrusted him, but because she had feared hope too much to name it. When my parents' estate was taken, she said, my brother claimed all assets had been sold. That was not true. My mother's sister in Ohio wrote to me months ago, but the letter reached Prescott late and Copper Bend later. There is a small inheritance held in my name from my grandmother. Not large, not enough to make anyone rich, but enough. Voss snapped. Nonsense. Coraline looked at Sheriff Cross through the bank window. He entered, carrying a second envelope. Telegraph came this morning, the sheriff said. I had it sent yesterday after Mrs. Granger brought me the letter. Funds confirmed through First National in Cincinnati. Draft payable to Coraline Mercer Granger. Amount $125. Matthew stared at her. Pritchard's composure cracked. Voss's face darkened. Coraline placed the bank draft on the desk, together with the money on your desk. That pays the note. Pritchard reached for it, but Voss slammed his cane down. That money is subject to family claim. Sheriff Cross moved closer. No, it ain't. Julian stood, sweating. Edmund, let it go. Voss turned on him. You spineless little beggar. Julian seemed to shrink. Coraline looked at her brother. Tell the truth. He shook his head. Tell it, she said not loudly. Julian's eyes darted to Voss, then to the sheriff, then to her. Something in him, perhaps the last decent thread, finally broke under the weight of being used. I forged her consent, he whispered. Voss lunged toward him. Matthew caught Voss by the arm and drove him back against the wall, not brutally, but with a force that rattled the window glass. You will not touch anyone in this room, Matthew said. Voss struggled once, then stopped when Sheriff Cross drew his revolver. The street outside had gone silent. Everyone was listening. Sheriff Cross said, Mr. Voss, I believe you and I have business concerning coercion, fraud, and threats made across territorial lines. Voss laughed, but it had no strength. You think this is over? For a cow and a woman with a little money? Matthew released him and stepped back. His face was pale with controlled rage. No, Matthew said. For my wife. The words carried through the open bank door into the street. Coraline felt them pass through the watching crowd. Not ownership, not bargain, vow. Pritchard stamped the note paid with a hand that trembled slightly. Matthew stared at the red ink, as if it were a sunrise he did not trust. Outside, people moved aside when Coraline and Matthew came out. Ruth stood in the wagon, fists clenched. Did we lose? She called. Matthew looked at Coraline. Coraline answered, No. Pearl burst into tears. Annie hugged her. Ruth sat down hard and covered her face. Mrs. Peabody approached, parasol lowered. For once, she looked smaller than her gossip. Mrs. Granger, she said, I owe you an apology. Coraline looked at her for a long moment. Yes, you do. Mrs. Peabody swallowed. I am sorry. Coraline nodded. Thank you. Matthew helped her into the wagon. His hand lingered at her waist only long enough for her to feel the question in it. She answered by resting her gloved hand briefly on his shoulder. They drove home beneath the storm-heavy sky. Halfway there, rain began. Not much, only a scattered blessing that darkened the dust and woke the smell of creosote from the desert. The girls laughed and lifted their faces. Mercy, tied behind the wagon after a visit to the town trough, shook her ears and rang her bell. At the ranch, rain tapped the roof in shy fingers. Coraline changed from her damp dress and found Matthew in the kitchen, staring at the paid note laid flat on the table. You should put that somewhere safe, she said. He looked at her. I thought I had. She did not understand until he touched the table. Here, the house, the family, her. The girls came tumbling in, wet and hungry. Ruth set plates without being asked. Annie stirred beans. Pearl dragged the rag doll through a puddle and was told by everyone at once to keep it off the clean chair. Matthew built the stove fire. Caroline mixed cornmeal with buttermilk and fried cakes in the skillet until the kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of browning edges. When supper was ready, Matthew did not sit at the far end as he usually did. He stood behind Caroline's chair and pulled it out. The girls noticed. Of course, they noticed everything. Caroline sat, cheeks warm. Matthew took his place beside her, not across, not distant. Beside, Ruth looked from one to the other. Does this mean she's not leaving? Caroline turned to Matthew. He looked back, giving her the answer to own. I am not leaving, she said. Pearl clapped both hands over her mouth. Annie grinned. Ruth blinked fast, then attacked her corn cake as though it had offended her. After supper, the rain stopped. The world outside shone clean in the last light. The repaired porch smelled of wet wood. The bean vines in the garden stood dark and alive. Mercy lowed from the barn, and her calf answered stronger than it ever had. Matthew found Caroline on the porch with her mother's shawl around her shoulders. The sunset burned rose and gold over the wash. I have something, he said. He opened his hand. In his palm lay a ring, not brass, not gold either. It was silver, plain and narrow, polished smooth. She recognized the shine before she understood. My mother's thimble, she whispered. I didn't sell it, he said quickly. I asked the blacksmith. He worked it down, said he could make it a ring and keep the engraving inside. Caroline took it with trembling fingers. Inside, faint but visible, were the initials her mother had worn thin through years of sewing. I should have asked first, Matthews said. If you hate it, she closed her hand around it. I do not hate it. I wanted you to have something that wasn't bought in a hurry while folks laughed. She looked at him through tears. He took the ring gently, waited. She gave him her left hand. He slid it onto her finger, where the brass ring had been. It fit a little loose, a little imperfect, like most true things at first. I married you for a cow, he said, voice rough. That will always be how the story starts. Caroline looked toward the barn. Mercy's bell gave one soft clank. Then we shall have to live so well, she said, that no one remembers it that way at the end. Matthew smiled then, not with one corner of his mouth, not hidden or ashamed, but fully. It changed his face. It made him look younger and more wounded and more whole. He leaned closer, slow enough for refusal, close enough for choice. Caroline met him halfway. Their first kiss was not dramatic. No thunder rolled, no fiddle played. It was warm and careful on a damp porch in Arizona territory, with supper dishes waiting inside and children spying badly through a curtain made from flour sack. It tasted faintly of coffee and rain, and all the words they had not rushed. Months later, people in Copper Bend still talk. People always do. But the story changed in the telling. They spoke of the Granger Ranch where milk never soured, where butter came stamped with little leaves, where 3 girls wore clean dresses to school, and Ruth Granger could outspell the banker's son. They spoke of Matthew Granger paying cash at the mercantile and tipping his hat whenever his wife entered a room. They spoke of Caroline Mercer Granger standing in church with her head high, singing beside a man who sang poorly, but no longer refused to sing at all. At home, there were curtains in every window by Christmas. Beans dried in sacks, a row of late flowers surprised the garden. Stubborn yellow faces turned toward the sun. The north fence held. The porch no longer sagged. Ellen's little shoe remained on the washstand, dusted and honored, not hidden. Blue's name was spoken sometimes, when Matthew worked with a young horse, and the speaking did not break him. On cold mornings, Caroline woke to coffee kept warm at the back of the stove. On long evenings, Matthew found his shirts mended before he noticed the tears. Ruth began calling Coraline by name without anger, then, one day by something softer, when fever took Pearl and fear stripped the house down to prayer. Annie learned to make biscuits. Pearl fed Mercy peppermint and insisted cows could understand compliments. And Mercy, the cow at the center of all that shame, grew fat and queenly in the barn, her bell ringing through seasons of work, worry, laughter, and ordinary grace. Some marriages begin with roses. Some begin with a ring chosen under lamplight and a man on one knee. Coraline and Matthew began with a bargain so poor the town laughed at it. A cow rope in one hand, and two wounded people, too proud to admit they were lonely. But a home is not made by how love begins. It is made by who stays to light the stove, who defends your name in public, who saves the last warm cup of coffee, and who chooses you again when the whole world knows the price you were once given and sees, at last, that you were priceless all along.